A group of Southern Rangers rode across the open plains, never expecting to fall straight into an ambush set by Northern soldiers in blue uniforms. Old muskets belched thick black smoke as bullets rained down on them. Realizing something was wrong, someone shouted for everyone to take cover in the woods. Though they looked disorganized and rough around the edges, this band of scattered fighters ultimately sent the well-trained Bluecoats running in panic. The rest of the team kept pulling back, and at that moment only Cole and one other stayed behind and became trapped while trying to rescue their comrades. An outdated Gatling gun turned into a heavy fire stronghold, pinning them down so hard they could not even lift their heads. To completely wipe out these guerrilla fighters, the Bluecoats rolled out their ultimate weapon. One thunderous blast left the Rangers utterly stunned. They had never seen a weapon like that before. Cole and his brothers, trapped in the chaos, were overwhelmed with anxiety. After fighting for 4 long years, it felt like this was the end. But at the razor's edge between life and death, Jesse made his entrance. His younger brother Frank charged to the front line, pulled out a golden long rifle, and from 100 meters away dropped the cannon operator with a single precise shot. Meanwhile, Jesse was still holding back in the woods, because he rarely made a move unless it was absolutely necessary. Only when the enemy was about to wipe out the Rangers did Jesse step forward in style. With a revolver in each hand, he ignored the limits of distance and stormed ahead with fearless momentum. After a quick roll across the ground, he reached Cole's side and finally asked about the situation. The Gatling gun and the cannon were the greatest threats, while everyone else struggled to figure out how to destroy those 2 deadly positions. Jesse had already come up with a brilliant plan. Whenever he flashes the confident smile before making a move, you know victory is certain. He then casually retreated back into the woods, just as the others wondered what he was about to do. Jesse rode straight into the battlefield on horseback. A dense wave of enemy soldiers launched their charge, and Jesse clenched the reins between his teeth while wielding twin revolvers like a man unstoppable. Every enemy who blocked his path was taken down. 12 bullets were gone in no time, but there was no need to worry, because he had 2 more revolvers hidden away and continued his stylish shooting spree. The Gatling gunners soon noticed this fierce warrior and swung their barrels toward him, determined to show him the power of their firepower. Yet not a single shot could touch him. If no one stepped in now, he would not be able to keep up the act. And at that critical moment, his brother Frank calmly aimed and dropped the gunner with 1 shot. He then fired 2 more times in quick succession, eliminating the remaining 2 operators and greatly weakening the enemy fire. Seeing this, the Rangers mounted their horses and launched a charge of their own. The Bluecoats moved stiffly like machines, while the riders across from them were swift and agile. The 2 sides finally crashed into each other, and the battlefield descended into complete chaos. Taking advantage of the exposed rear defense, Jack charged straight in and engaged in close combat. To everyone's surprise, his hand-to-hand skills were just as formidable, forcing the enemy's back line into retreat again and again. But no matter how skilled you are, you still have to fear a gun. Seeing that the young soldier was barely more than a boy, the kind-hearted Jesse chose to spare him. The rest of the team fought their way out of the encirclement and ultimately turned the tide of the battle. After this clash, Jesse's prestige rose once again. Afterward, the Rangers continued searching for another battlefield, only to discover that the war had already ended. The defeated Southern veterans hung their heads and regretfully admitted that the surrender agreement had been signed. Jesse's 4-year life of guerrilla fighting had come to an end. The unit was disbanded, and the 5 men unwillingly set out on the road back home. Before long, they arrived in their hometown of Liberty City. Looking at the familiar yet strangely changed surroundings, they were filled with endless hopes for the future. Perhaps returning to farming would not be such a bad life. But as they entered the town, blue-uniformed soldiers were everywhere, and it was clear the town had been taken over. Even more infuriating, the victors labeled the former guerrillas as traitors and hanged 1 member every week to intimidate and settle old scores. The hot-blooded Cole wanted to rescue the legendary figure before his eyes, but Jesse grabbed him and stopped him. There were soldiers everywhere, and they could not risk drawing attention, because they too were defeated guerrillas. The group had no choice but to leave for the moment. A second piece of bad news in the occupied town quickly followed. Jesse went to visit the father of a fallen comrade, and with a single turn the comrade's sister instantly captured his heart. The little girl from years ago had grown into a graceful young woman, leaving the brothers thrilled. But the moment they stepped inside, their faces darkened. The dentist father, upon learning of his son's death in battle, struggled to suppress his grief. After the war, there had been no pardon for so-called war criminals, and instead the Rangers became primary targets for punishment. Even more oppressive, The railway company planned to buy up every farm in town to build a western railroad. Jesse had resisted the Northern Army in pursuit of a fair and just world, yet after a brutal war, the people at the top were still incompetent, and the world remained just as dark as before. But he also knew that one man alone could not change everything. After being away from home for so long, the brothers finally reunited with their elderly mother, and an old friend had been waiting there for them as well. It was rare for everyone to gather together and savor such a warm and peaceful moment. Having laid down his arms to return to the fields, Jesse's heart had become calm and steady. In contrast, his cousin Cole deeply missed the days on the battlefield, revealing just how different their personalities truly were. However, only a few days into their quiet life, Parker, the special envoy of the president of the Lock Northern Railroad Company, came knocking at their door. Standing beside him was Alan, the founder of a private detective agency. One handled words and the other force, and together they attempted to purchase Jesse's farm for only $2 per acre. Such a dirt cheap offer was something Jesse would never accept, and he had no intention of selling anyway. Parker even had the contract prepared and threatened that they had better sign today, because tomorrow the price would no longer be the same. But he had clearly picked the wrong men to threaten, unaware of who Jesse and his companions really were.
Ma'am, I think that you should search your heart and try to do the right thing.
Faced with 3 guns pointed at him, Parker wisely chose to leave. From that moment on, a bitter feud was born between them. That night, the townspeople gathered to discuss a response. The railway company was not truly buying land to build tracks, but simply to repurpose it for profit. Yet the company's power was overwhelming and backed by legal authority, leaving everyone discouraged. At that moment, another devastating piece of news arrived. During a land dispute with Cole's family, an emotional Cole had accidentally killed 2 agents, and he was scheduled to be hanged the next day. Panic instantly spread through the crowd. Voices overlapped in heated discussion, and fear gripped the townspeople. Cole reassured everyone to go home first, promising that he would find a solution. After the neighbors left, the young people who remained decided to storm the execution ground. Among them was Zerelda. Jesse told her to stay out of it, because she was a young woman with no combat experience. But Zerelda's determination could not be shaken, so they all began planning how to rescue Cole. The next day, the town proceeded with the execution as scheduled. Beneath the massive crowd, an undercurrent of tension surged. Alan from the detective agency had already set up an inescapable trap, with snipers positioned throughout the town. What he did not know was that the sharpshooter at the highest vantage point had already been subdued by Frank. Yet Alan remained completely unaware. As the time of execution approached, he grew increasingly uneasy. Cole was a tough man, facing death with calm composure and unwavering dignity. Just as a blue-uniformed soldier drew his blade to cut the rope, the ground suddenly began to tremble. Alan turned toward the southern gate and immediately sensed something was wrong. Hundreds of horses burst into the square, throwing the execution site into chaos as civilians scattered in every direction. Amid the turmoil, Jesse rode in among them. Alan had never expected his carefully laid plan to be so easily shattered. Amid the chaos, the blue-uniformed soldiers tried to hang Cole, but Frank from the high ground dropped the executioner with a single shot. Alan was furious at the sight, wondering who they thought they were, coming and going as they pleased. Jesse charged toward the scaffold without regard for danger, swiftly cutting the rope from around Cole's neck, leaving behind a knife, and then riding off. After Cole sliced through the ropes binding his hands, Jesse returned with a horse to pull him away. Once the thundering herd scattered, the Bluecoats finally rushed out to respond, but it was already too late. Jesse's team had broken through. Seeing this, Alan stepped into the middle of the road and fired a shot at Jesse, only to be struck down and knocked unconscious by Jesse's charging horse. Although they had successfully stormed the execution ground, Jesse paid a price for it. Fortunately, the bullet had not pierced his heart. Just then, someone knocked at the door, and the dentist stepped outside to check. Zerelda stayed by Jesse's side without leaving for a single moment. Blue-uniformed soldiers went door to door conducting searches. When they reached the second floor, Zerelda pretended to be preparing for bed, and the embarrassed soldiers quickly withdrew from the room. Zerelda gazed at Jesse with worry, hoping he would recover soon. Unexpectedly, Jesse's wandering hand revealed his true condition, and Zerelda immediately understood. It turned out he had been pretending to be seriously injured to steal a little affection, and he was clearly enjoying it. Since the successful rescue at the execution ground, the townspeople had gained the courage to resist. Left with no choice, Raines, the president of the railroad company, finally appeared and instructed Alan and his assistant Parker to act without restraint, promising to take responsibility even if lives were lost. Parker had already secretly assembled 4 reconnaissance teams, waiting only for his boss's command. Jesse's body gradually recovered. During this time, his growing closeness with Zerelda allowed them to understand each other more deeply, though he was reluctant to leave her side. He could not continue pretending to be ill, especially since Zerelda's father was a doctor. That night, the town held a bonfire celebration. Cole, reborn after surviving the noose, reunited with the recovered Jesse, and the two shared a long, powerful embrace that spoke louder than words. Seizing the joyful atmosphere, Jesse pulled Zerelda aside. As they talked, the mood between them slowly turned intimate. Trying to impress her, Jesse confessed his feelings in the tone of Shakespeare, though he could not quite remember the exact lines. Zerelda did not mind at all, because she had already fallen for him. With mutual affection, the two leaned in and kissed. At that very moment, a group of gunmen suddenly appeared near the celebration and blew up Cole's house. The festive mood came to a screeching halt. Cole stood there gripping his rifle, helplessly watching the attackers swagger away. The townspeople rushed in with buckets to put out the fire. When Jesse arrived, a deep sense of dread washed over him, and he and his brother raced back home. As they reached it, an explosion erupted inside the house. The two brothers watched their home destroyed before their eyes as their mother stumbled out. She had barely been reunited with her sons before passing away in sorrow. Jesse and Frank held their mother, overwhelmed with grief. For their mother, and for the town as well, a reckless and fearless plan for revenge quietly took shape in Jesse's heart. The young men whose homes had been destroyed gathered together, ready to strike back. Instead of hunting down the men who killed their families, they chose to drive the true mastermind, the railroad company. Out of town, Jesse said goodbye to his girlfriend Zerelda, wanting to settle his final attachment so he could focus entirely on taking on the forces of capital. Soon after, the group put their plan into action. With their extensive combat experience, they handled robberies with remarkable ease. Jesse had not expected their first heist to go so smoothly. As long as they cut off the railroad company's cash flow, the company would have no choice but to leave.
Who are you people?
The James Gang.
From that moment on, the gang's name echoed across the West, although there was a minor hiccup during their first job when the town sheriff caught wind of it in advance. No one was willing to risk their life for such a small paycheck. The huge success filled them with excitement. They threw the railroad company's land contracts into the fire. Yet beneath the appearance of unity against a common enemy, cracks were already forming within the gang. Second-in-command Cole was brave but reckless, and he constantly wanted to be the leader, demanding more presence and authority. Fortunately, their shared goal kept things steady, and the friction was quickly smoothed over. From then on, Jesse made a point of consulting Cole in advance about major decisions to avoid damaging their unity. Before long, news of their robberies made the newspapers. What shocked them was that right after their last job, another gang robbed a bank, and all the blame was pinned on them. Their first operation had already stunned the entire West, yet they showed no sign of slowing down. Railway lines along the route were blown to pieces, causing massive losses for the railroad company. Alan remarked that they never should have destroyed those young farmers' homes, because provoking them would only bring trouble. However, that reckless move had been carried out by Secretary Parker without authorization. Railroad President Raines initially dismissed these hot-headed youths, but when he saw newspaper after newspaper detailing the crimes committed by the James Younger gang against his company, he was furious. Even more irritating, the articles were written by Jesse himself. Instead of lying low, Jesse only escalated their operations. Without harming innocent people, they took as much money as possible. Part of it they kept, and part they distributed to the townsfolk. As a result, the gang's reputation across the West soared. As the scale of their robberies grew larger and larger, the railroad company was finally forced to take them seriously. They gathered to discuss countermeasures. After 8 months of observation, Alan had figured out the pattern behind Jesse's choice of targets and laid an inescapable trap at the bank most likely to be robbed next. Jesse continued to ride across the West, harassing the railroad company at every turn. In the end, even law enforcement began to turn a blind eye, because the money they seized was given back to the people, earning them immense public support. As the team's fame grew, internal divisions became more visible. Cole resented the gang's name, questioning why his surname did not come first instead of calling it the James Younger Gang. The others argued that reversing the order would sound awkward, and the disagreement over a name ended in bitterness. With their rising fame, Jesse became an idol admired by men, women, and children alike. In contrast, Cole struggled to gain recognition, and jealousy began to take root. Other members also longed for fame, yet they were often overlooked by the public, and their wanted posters were drawn so poorly that they looked nothing like them. Bob of the younger family was particularly dissatisfied, so in the next robbery he went out of his way to stand out, determined to make a name for himself. Sure enough, after the job, Bob's wanted poster finally resembled him, and his bounty rose to $5,000. Even so, Jesse's fame far outshone everyone else, leaving the others feeling like mere sidekicks, and their conversations with him carried a trace of bitterness. That night, Cole's inner circle discussed robbing the next bank. It was the very bank Alan had turned into a trap, supposedly holding $100,000. The information had come from the newspaper. Jesse sensed something was off, because no bank would be foolish enough to publicly reveal its deposits, but Cole's confidence had grown excessive after so many successful jobs without a single failure. He narrowly believed that Jesse was trying to strip him of his authority, and that Jesse himself had grown arrogant lately. The others remained silent.
None of us poor idiots want to go up against Jesse James, greatest outlaw who ever lived. One for you, this game won't be able to find a goat's ass with a stick.
You have got mighty full of yourself lately, Jesse.
You all do?
Frank?
To Jesse's shock, even his own brother lowered his head. Two tigers cannot share one mountain, and the cousins finally tore away all pretense. They wrestled in the ring to vent their anger, and eventually even drew guns on each other. Their companions rushed to break them apart, and Frank was especially desperate to stop the conflict. Though Jesse and Cole were cousins, Cole's ambition for power and fame burned far stronger. Reluctantly, Jesse agreed to rob the bank, and the tension between them temporarily subsided. A few days later, they entered the target bank as usual. The team moved with clear division of labor, and Lonnie, standing watch, clutched his lucky charm in prayer. When he looked up, he was instantly stunned.
Oh no.
The others scrambled to dodge bullets, hiding behind horse troughs and waiting for an opening. Hearing the gunfire, Jesse immediately sensed danger. The bank was filled entirely with Alan's men. A fierce close-range shootout erupted. Fortunately, they were seasoned veterans, and the three of them survived the first wave of gunfire. Jesse drew the enemy's fire as the agents emptied their magazines in a frenzy. Losing all sense of caution, only when their clips ran dry did they realize their mistake. Cole and the others emerged at once, regaining control of the situation. Cole hurried to open the vault, only to find it completely empty. That was when he realized they had been fooled. They managed to stabilize the interior of the bank, but the firepower outside was far more intense than they had anticipated. Escaping successfully would be extremely difficult. Yet Jesse flashed a wicked smile once again, then charged straight out and swiftly removed the bomb strapped to a horse. He had prepared for this all along. In the next instant, he detonated the bank, scattering the enemy's attention. Then he moved through the chaos as if no one could stop him, appearing right before the gunmen and leaving them stunned. But Jesse merely tossed down a massive firecracker and walked away. The enemy formation that had been carefully arranged was thrown into complete disarray in an instant. He did not spare the sniper on the high ground either, blasting apart the water tower in one strike. An entire town was thrown into chaos by him alone. He then brought the horses over and signaled his companions to retreat, and they managed to leave the town without further loss. Yet sacrifices were inevitable, and the youngest member, Jim, was fatally shot. Alan never expected that half a month of careful planning would end like this. Jim's death forced Jesse to rethink his future. The greater their fame grew, the harder Alan would strike back. They were brothers who had faced life and death together, and Jesse no longer wanted to live with danger hanging over them every day. Watching his closest friends fall one by one weighed heavily on him. Cole clearly realized his own shortcomings and expressed his apology, hoping to keep Jesse in the gang. But Jesse had already made up his mind, and he left the team with his brother. Soon after, he found Zerelda and decided to pursue a peaceful life together. The West was no longer a place they could stay. The two moved to the prosperous East and even registered their marriage. Yet the good days did not last long before Alan captured Jesse and threw him behind bars. Meanwhile, Cole recruited new gunmen and continued robbing banks. His aggressive style made the banks uneasy, and strangely enough they preferred Jesse's more courteous approach to robbery. Under Cole's leadership, the gang's reputation declined rapidly. News of Jesse's arrest soon appeared in the newspapers. Bob assumed Cole had betrayed him, and a conflict erupted between them over the misunderstanding. Fortunately, Cole had matured and restrained his anger. In the past, he would have shot his own brother without hesitation. Alan had finally achieved his long-awaited goal of capturing Jesse. After years of crossing paths, he He had come to admire Jesse, believing that if his talents were used for justice, his future would be limitless. Though he hated him deeply, Alan treated Jesse with dignity and respect and did not abuse his authority. He intended to escort Jesse personally to Washington for trial as a warning to others. On the journey, Jesse remained unusually calm. When he saw Parker, the man responsible for destroying his home and killing his mother, Jesse burned with rage. Railroad President Raines mocked him, saying that the son of a farmer would always remain a farmer, while his wealth, like the gold watch in his hand, would be passed down through generations. Jesse was not provoked, and instead calmly stepped into the carriage, his entire body bound in chains, making escape seem impossible. To ensure safety, Alan ordered the captain to lock all the guns in a cabinet. The captain was puzzled, thinking that with so many men and Jesse bound hand and foot, escape was out of the question. Alan angrily warned him not to underestimate their prisoner. The captain reluctantly locked the weapons away, though he secretly kept one gun for himself. The train headed toward Washington. After carefully observing for some time, Jesse finally found a weakness. He deliberately provoked the captain, who unexpectedly drew his gun. In a flash of swift movement, Jesse overpowered the guard and seized the pistol, yet he did not kill them, instead forcing the guards off the train. Jesse did not choose to flee, because he still had one final mission: avenging his mother. Once the blue-uniformed soldiers realized Jesse had broken free, they launched a frantic counterattack, but Jesse moved as if blessed by fate, bullets seeming to miss him by inches. Even so, without allies and surrounded from both front and rear, he prepared to fight to the very end. At that critical moment, the locomotive was halted by a cannon blast. Cole and Zerelda had arrived with reinforcements. Their riders stormed the train at full speed. Seeing this, Alan urged his employer to take cover, because this was no time for bravado. The bluecoats hid inside the carriages and resisted desperately, but Cole led the cowboys in a fierce counterattack and quickly seized control. Realizing they were outmatched, the blue-uniformed soldiers surrendered one after another. Not spotting Parker in the carriage, Jesse rushed toward the rear of the train. Sure enough, 3 men were attempting to escape. Jesse leapt forward to block their path and swiftly disarmed Alan. When Parker tried to ambush him, Jesse shot him without hesitation, finally avenging his mother. Years earlier, Alan had wounded Jesse, and Jesse had crippled Alan in return, so their score was settled. As for Raines, Jesse had no desire to cause greater turmoil, and merely shot the gold watch symbolizing his legacy before returning Alan's gun. In truth, the railroad had never needed to pass through Jesse's hometown, and the entire scheme had been Parker's doing. By bypassing Liberty City, the company could have saved even more money. The two sides ultimately shook hands and made peace. Jesse and Cole's main force then departed. The two brothers, reunited after so long, embraced tightly. Cole once again invited Jesse to rejoin the gang, but Jesse still longed for a peaceful life and declined. He left with Zerelda, riding toward the happiness that belonged to them. I am a movie enthusiast, and I will see you in the next episode.